The most dangerous person is the one who believes they were destined for greatness, but ended up with nothing. Imagine a cold gray morning in Providence, Rhode Island. It's December 13th, 2025. At Brown University, the air usually hums with the quiet, frantic energy of finals week. Students are hunched over laptops in the rock, clutching lukewarm coffees, or gathering in small groups to review the complexities of fluid dynamics and quantum mechanics. It is a place that feels safe, a literal ivory tower designed to protect the pursuit of knowledge. But at 9 a.m., that sanctuary was shattered. 48-year-old Cláudio Manuel Neves Valente walked into the Burroughs and Hawley building, a sprawling complex of engineering and physics labs, and opened fire. This wasn't a random tragedy. This was a calculated strike against a path he couldn't escape. This is Ria, and welcome to the spark that lit the flame. Today marks a massive milestone for us, as it is our very first video podcast. For those who have been following our deep dives into the dark corners of the human psyche on Spotify, thank you so much for coming along on this transition. Please check us out on Spotify at The Spark That Lit the Flame. Links will be down in the description below if you want to check it out. So, our full archive of audio episodes is still there, and this episode will also be available on Spotify if you prefer to listen to it. But today, I felt like using a visual medium to map out the geography of a grudge that lasted 22 years. And this show, we don't just talk about what happened, we talk about the why. We look for the specific intersection of ego, circumstance, and choice. The spark that lit the flame. Disclaimer, I and the Spark That Lit the Flame team do not support or glorify the actions of Cláudio Valente. We are here to analyze the pathology behind the crime and to honor the memories of those lost, Ella Cook and Muhammad Aziz Amorzokov. We will distinguish between the investigative facts and our own psychological analysis. Now let's go back to where the paths of true geniuses first crossed. So, to understand why a 40-year-old man would throw his life away in the hallway at Brown, we have to look at the Instituto Superior Técnico in Lisbon, Portugal, in the late 1990s. Now, in the world of European science, IST is a pressure cooker. It's where the brightest minds of Portugal go to prove themselves. In the graduating class, there were two names everyone knew, Cláudio Valente and Nuno Loureiro. Valente was described by peers as a phenom. He wasn't just a good student, he was a prodigy. He was so advanced that the faculty reportedly allowed him to lead seminars while he was still an undergraduate. He was cocksure, brilliant, and according to those who knew him, deeply aware of his own superior intellect. When he graduated, Valente was at the very top. He ranked higher than Loureiro. In 2000, Valente landed what many consider the golden ticket, a student visa and a spot in the prestigious physics PhD program at Brown University. He was the chosen one. But academia is a marathon, not a sprint. At Brown, the environment shifted. You aren't just the smartest person in your own small town anymore. You're in a room with the smartest people from the entire world. Valente's brilliance was undisputed, but his personality was becoming a liability. Former classmates recall him being arrogant and socially isolated. He didn't just want to succeed. He wanted to dominate. In 2003, after only 3 semesters, Valente formally withdrew from Brown. We don't have the exact private details of his departure, but the records show a man who simply fell off. He left the program, lost his academic standing, and eventually his path to the greatness he felt he was owed. Meanwhile, Nuno Loureiro's career took flight. He stayed the course. He moved from IST to Imperial College London, then to Princeton, and eventually to MIT, where he became the director of the Plasma Science and Fusion Center. Loureiro was solving the world's energy problems. Valente was disappearing into the Florida service industry. For 22 years, Valente lived in the shadow of a life he thought should have been his. Now, what does a man like Valente do for 2 decades? This is the most chilling part of the case. The silence. He lived in a working class neighborhood in Miami. He worked odd jobs, stayed off social media, but while his physical life was quiet, his internal world was an echo chamber of resentment. In psychology, we call this as relative deprivation. Valente didn't compare himself to his neighbors in Miami. He compared himself to the man in headlines, Nuno Loureiro. Every time Loureiro won a grant or published a breakthrough paper in Nature, it wasn't just news to Valente. It was a personal insult. It was a reminder of the theft of his destiny. This is where we look at the prestige trap. In elite circles, your identity is often tied entirely to your rank. If you are the genius and you fail, you don't just lose a job, you lose your reason for existing. Valente couldn't pivot. He couldn't find joy in a normal life because his ego wouldn't allow him to be anything less than the man at the top of the IST rankings. By late 2025, something snapped. Whether it was a specific news report about Loureiro or a personal milestone like his 48th birthday, Valente decided it was time to correct the record. He rented a car, drove from Florida to Rhode Island, and carried with him 20 years of bottled up rage. The Bruce and Hawley building is a labyrinth of concrete and glass. On the morning of December 13th, it was supposed to be a place of quiet study. Valente entered the building at approximately 9 a.m. He wasn't looking for Loureiro. He knew Loureiro was at MIT. He was looking for the institution. He was looking for the new Valientes, young, brilliant students who still had futures that he had lost. Ella Cook was a 21-year-old senior from New Jersey. She was described as the heart of her department. She was a woman who used her brilliance to help others, often staying late to tutor classmates. She was just months away from her own graduation. Muhammad Aziz Amurzokov was 24, a graduate student from Uzbekistan. He had traveled thousands of miles carrying the hopes of his family to study at one of the best universities in the world. He was living exactly the life Valente had started 25 years earlier. When Valente opened fire, he wasn't just shooting individuals. He was shooting at his own reflection. He was shooting at the success he couldn't have. By the initial chaos, 9 other people were wounded. The terror lasted only minutes, but the damage was generational. Valente fled the scene with the same cold calculation he had once applied to his studies. He managed to evade the immediate perimeter, triggering a 5-day manhunt that spanned multiple states. The way Cláudio Valente was eventually identified is a fascinating study in modern community vigilance. See, a few hours before the shooting, a Brown graduate known only as John was on campus. He encountered a man in a bathroom in the engineering building who looked entirely out of place. The man was older, dressed in a heavy, dark coat that didn't quite fit the mild weather, and he had an aura of intense, vibrating negative energy. John's intuition kicked in. He didn't know a shooting was about to happen, but he felt a prickle on his neck. He followed the man at a distance and watched him get into a gray Nissan Sentra with Florida plates. After the news of the shooting broke, John didn't just wait for the police. he went to r/Providence subreddit. He posted a detailed description of the car and the man. That digital breadcrumb trail was what allowed the FBI to link the Florida rental records to Valente. Valente was eventually cornered in a storage unit in New Hampshire. He didn't want a trial. He didn't want to explain himself. He took his own life, ending the story on his own terms, just as he had tried to rewrite the story of his academic life. So, what was the spark? In the case of Cláudio Valente, the spark was an unbearable weight of a failed destiny. It wasn't just that he dropped out, it was his refusal to let the prodigy version of himself die. When he saw his former rival succeeding, it acted like a constant strike of flint against his ego. The flame didn't catch in 2025. It had been smoldering since 2003. The shooting was simply the moment the heat became too much for the vessel to hold. The tragedy at Brown serves as a stark warning about the prestige trap. See, we live in a world that is increasingly measuring human value based on institutional labels and academic grade. When we teach young people and ourselves, our identity is entirely tied to winning at these elite levels, and that creates dangerous fragility. If that prestige is removed, what is left of a person? This case also reminds us of the vital importance of breaking the isolation. See, Valente lived for years in a digital and physical echo chamber of his own resentment, without external voices to challenge his narrative or friends to ground him in a new identity. This bitterness became his only reality. It's a reminder to look out for those who have fallen off the map and to foster communities where failure isn't seen as an existential end, but as a pivotal point. I want to close off today by saying their names. Ella Cook, a young woman who was supposed to be celebrating graduation this spring. Muhammad Aziz Amurzokov, a young man who carried the dreams of a family in Uzbekistan across an ocean. They were not rivals or symbols. They were people. They were kind. They were hardworking and they were innocent. And they deserved to have their lives. The Brown University shooting remains as a painful example of how long-held resentment can warp a brilliant mind into something unrecognizable. It shows us that intelligence is no shield against the darkness of the ego, and that the most dangerous weapon is a mind that spent 20 years convincing itself that it had been wronged. So, if you're a student or an academic feeling the crushing weight of expectations, or if you find yourself trapped in a cycle of comparison and resentment, please reach out. There is a life outside of prestige and labels, and there is worth outside of a rank. Talk to a counselor or a friend or even a mentor, because you do not want that internal narrative to become an echo chamber. Thank you so much for joining me on this difficult but necessary look into the sparks that trigger tragedy. Remember to stay critical of the stories you tell yourself, stay connected to those around you, and above it all, stay safe. See you on the next episode of The Spark That Lit the Flame.